In a small, run-down cabin, Elias lived a life etched by scarcity. His ranch, once a source of pride, was now a skeletal shadow of its former self. Bills piled higher than the meager hay he could afford for his few remaining animals. Hope was a luxury he hadn't felt in years, a distant star he could no longer see. He'd walk for miles, scavenging for anything that might fetch $1, his boots worn thin, his spirit even thinner. Each sunrise brought only the grim certainty of another day's struggle. He'd tried everything. He'd worked harder, prayed longer, but the land remained stubborn, the rain scarce, and the markets unforgiving. His neighbors, some sympathetic, some simply busy with their own battles, offered little in the way of tangible help. They'd seen good men broken by this land, and Elias felt he was well on his way. He'd sold off most of his herd, then the tools, even the old truck that sputtered more than it drove. What was left was a worn-out saddle, a collection of rusting fences, and a heart heavy with unspoken defeat. One sweltering afternoon, Elias found himself at a travelling fair on the edge of town. It wasn't the kind of place he usually frequented. The gaudy colours and loud music felt like a mockery of his sombre existence. But he'd heard there was a small livestock auction, a long shot. Yes, but sometimes long shots were all you had. He navigated through the crowds, his eyes scanning the pens. Most of the animals were standard fare, too expensive for his threadbare pockets. Then, tucked away in a dusty corner, almost an afterthought, he saw her. She was a foal, impossibly small, no bigger than a large dog. Her coat was a dull, matted brown, her legs spindly, and her ribs showed faintly beneath her skin. She looked weak, forgotten. Most people passed her by, their eyes drawn to the sturdier, more promising stock. But something about her stillness, her quiet vulnerability, caught Elias. He approached the pen, his heart giving a strange, unfamiliar lurch. The auctioneer, a man with a booming voice and a cynical smile, was hawking a pen of chickens nearby. He barely glanced at the tiny foal. "This little one here," he called out, his voice dismissive. "Barely a mouthful. Anyone want to take her off my hands? 50 cents? That's right, $half. For the lot." A ripple of laughter went through the small crowd. 50 cents. It was less than a cup of coffee, less than a loaf of bread. Elias hesitated. He had practically nothing in his pocket, only a few crumpled bills and a handful of change. 50 cents. It was almost an insult, but the foal's large dark eyes met his, and in them he saw not just hunger, but a flicker of something else. A spark? A plea? He dug into his pocket, his fingers fumbling with the coins. He pulled out a $half, its surface worn smooth by countless transactions. It was money he had earmarked for a small bag of feed, a tiny comfort for his existing, equally struggling. Animals? But looking at the foal, at her desperate need, he made a decision. He held out the coin. "I'll take her," he said, his voice rough with disuse. The auctioneer shrugged, taking the coin without a second look. "She's yours, old-timer. Good luck with that." He didn't even bother with a halter. Elias simply coaxed the little creature out of the pen. She stumbled a bit, her legs still unaccustomed to the world outside her small enclosure. He led her away from the noise and the crowds, a strange feeling settling over him. He had spent his last 50 cents on a creature that looked like she wouldn't survive the week. It was a foolish, impulsive act, the kind born of desperation, not good judgment. He named her Whisper, for the quiet way she moved, for the faint, almost inaudible hope she seemed to represent. As he walked her the long miles back to his ranch, she trotted alongside him, her small hooves making soft thuds on the dry earth. The sun beat down, but she didn't falter. He shared his meager water with her, pouring a little into his cupped hand for her to drink. She lapped it up eagerly, her small muzzle pressing against his skin. This was his farm, or what was left of it. A few tired cows, a couple of scrawny chickens, and now a 50-cent foal that looked like a gust of wind could send her tumbling. He looked at his run-down barn, the peeling paint, the sagging roof. He looked at Whisper, her ribs stark against her hide. What had he done? He felt a familiar ache of despair creeping back, a cold knot in his stomach. He had no feed, no shelter to speak of, and certainly no money for a vet. This was not a solution. It was another problem, a tiny fragile burden. As they reached the rickety gate of his property, Whisper let out a soft whinny. It wasn't a cry of pain, but something else. A greeting? A question? Elias sighed, pushing the gate open. He led her to a small, overgrown paddock, tossing her a handful of the sparse grass. She nibbled at it cautiously, then seemed to gain a little strength. He watched her for a long time, a strange mix of regret and an even stranger, nascent protectiveness swirling within him. She was so small, so utterly defenseless. He had nothing to offer her but his own meager existence. He looked at the vast, indifferent sky, the same sky that had witnessed so many of his failures. He whispered to the foal, "Well, Whisper, looks like it's just you and me against the world, huh?" He didn't expect an answer, but as he turned to go back to his cabin, he saw Whisper take a few tentative steps, then a few more, her wobbly legs gaining a surprising steadiness. She followed him, not crowding him, but staying close, her dark eyes fixed on him. It was the first sign that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of his luck, but the beginning of something he couldn't yet understand. He entered his small, dusty cabin, the air thick with the smell of old wood and regret. He sat down on his worn chair, the silence, pressing in. He thought about the 50 cents, about the fragile life he had just taken on. It felt like a joke, a cruel twist of fate. He was a poor rancher, barely making ends meet. What could he possibly do with a foal? But as he looked out the window at the small brown shape in the paddock, a different feeling began to stir. A flicker of responsibility, a whisper of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He couldn't explain it, but he knew he wouldn't abandon her. He would do what he could with what little he had. He would try. He spent the evening sorting through his few remaining supplies. A half-empty bag of oats meant for his chickens, some stale bread, a few withered carrots he'd been saving. It wasn't ideal, not by a long shot, but it was something. He carefully prepared a small pile of the oats mixed with some crushed feed for his cows and a bit of the bread. He went out to the paddock as dusk settled, the air cooling and a sliver of moon appearing in the sky. Whisper was resting, lying down in the tall grass. When she saw him, she stirred and rose, her movements still a little clumsy. He placed the meager offering on a flat stone, then stepped back. She approached it slowly, sniffing, then began to eat. Her small body seemed to absorb the food with gratitude. Elias watched, a lump forming in his throat. It was so little, but to her it was a feast. He stayed there for a while, just observing her. He noticed the way her ears twitched at every sound, the way she stood alert, even when resting. There was a resilience in her, a quiet determination that resonated with something deep inside him. He realized then that he hadn't truly felt a sense of purpose in years. His days had been a cycle of survival, of just getting by. But with Whisper, there was a new mission. He had to help this little creature thrive. He had to prove that even in his own broken state, he could offer something of value, something good. That night, Elias slept fitfully. His dreams were a jumble of dust, despair, and the image of a tiny foal. He woke before dawn, the cabin still cloaked in darkness. He immediately went outside. The moon was still visible, casting long shadows across the land. He found Whisper standing near the fence, looking out towards the horizon. She wasn't eating. She was just watching. As he approached, she turned her head, and he could have sworn he saw recognition in her eyes. She didn't shy away. Instead, she took a step towards him, then another, until she was standing right beside him. He reached out a hesitant hand, his calloused fingers brushing against her soft muzzle. She nuzzled into his palm, a low, rumbling sound emanating from her chest. It wasn't a purr, but it was close. It was a sound of trust, of acceptance. Elias stood there, frozen, the cold morning air doing nothing to chill the warmth spreading through him. He had bought a creature for 50 cents, a creature he had no business owning, and somehow she had given him something in return. She had given him a reason to face the sunrise, a reason to hope. He looked at his ranch, the struggling fields, the dilapidated barn. It was still a daunting prospect, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel entirely impossible. He looked at Whisper, her small form silhouetted against the pale sky. He had a feeling this was going to be a journey, and he was ready to start. He just didn't know how far it would take them. He knew he had to do more than just feed her. He needed to find her proper food, to build her a better shelter, to ensure she grew strong and healthy. It was a mountain to climb, but he felt a new resolve. He would find a way. The days that followed were a blur of hard work and quiet observation. Elias dedicated himself to Whisper's care. He learned her habits, her little quirks. He noticed she was a natural athlete, even in her weakened state. She would playfully buck and kick, her spindly legs moving with surprising grace. He found himself smiling more, his usual grim expression softening. He started mending the fences around her paddock, using salvaged wood and wire. He cleared a section of the overgrown grass, making it easier for her to move. He searched the dusty shelves of his barn, unearthing old, forgotten tools and a few sacks of grain he'd stashed away years ago, thinking he'd never use them again. He mixed the grain with a little of the hay he managed to scrounge from a neighbor who was clearing out his barn. He'd traded a few hours of his own labor for the hay, a small victory. Whisper ate with an insatiable appetite, her ribs slowly beginning to recede, her coat gaining a subtle sheen. Elias watched her transformations with a deep sense of pride. He'd always been a man of few words, his emotions often buried deep, but Whisper had a way of drawing them out. He'd talk to her as he worked, recounting stories of his younger days, of his dreams for this ranch, dreams he'd long since abandoned. Whisper would listen, her head cocked, her dark eyes attentive, as if she understood every word. One crisp autumn morning, Elias noticed something remarkable. Whisper was racing across the paddock, not just trotting, but truly running, her legs a blur of motion. She leapt over a small fallen log with an effortless bound, her tail high in the air. It was a display of pure, unadulterated joy. Elias stopped his work, leaning on his shovel, and watched, a wide grin spreading across his face. He had never seen such a spirit. She was no longer just a 50-cent foal. She was a creature of beauty and power, a testament to resilience. He knew then that she was more than just an animal he'd bought on a whim. She was a gift that had arrived when he needed it most. He remembered the auctioneer's words, "Barely a mouthful." He chuckled. The man had no idea what he was talking about. This tiny creature was going to be something special. He started to feel a stir of pride, feeling he hadn't experienced in years. It was the pride of a caretaker, of someone who was nurturing life and seeing it flourish. He found himself looking forward to each day, to seeing Whisper's progress. The ranch still looked worn and tired, but now there was a spark of life in the paddock, a splash of vibrant energy that seemed to chase away some of the shadows. Word began to spread through the small rural community. Whispers about Elias's new foal. Most people dismissed it as another one of Elias's eccentricities. He was a quiet, solitary man, prone to unusual decisions. But curiosity, as it often does, began to build. One afternoon, Martha, his closest neighbor, a kind woman with a sharp eye and an even sharper tongue, rode over on her sturdy mare. She'd seen Elias working in the paddock and decided to investigate. Elias was brushing Whisper's coat, using an old, soft brush he'd found. Whisper stood patiently, enjoying the attention. Martha reined in her horse, her gaze fixed on the foal. "Elias," she called out, her voice laced with surprise. "Is that a horse you got there?" Elias looked up, a little flustered. He wasn't used to company, especially not when he was tending to Whisper. "She is, Martha," he replied, his voice softer than usual. "Her name's Whisper." Martha rode closer, her eyes widening as she took in the foal. "Well, I'll be," she murmured. "She's grown. And look at that coat, Elias. It's gleaming." Elias beamed. "She's a quick learner and a strong one." Martha looked from Whisper to Elias, a knowing smile playing on her lips. 50 cents, wasn't it? That's what I heard. Elias nodded, a faint blush creeping up his neck. It was. Martha let out a soft laugh. Only you, Elias. Only you would find a treasure for 50 cents and then turn it into, well, this. She gestured at Whisper, who was now nudging Elias's hand playfully. She's got spirit, that one. Elias agreed, his heart swelling with affection for his little charge. She does. More than I ever expected. Martha stayed for a while, watching Whisper trot and prance. She asked Elias about his plans for her questions practical and shrewd. Elias, surprisingly, found himself opening up. He spoke about his hopes, about how Whisper had reignited a spark in him. Martha, seeing the genuine affection and newfound purpose in Elias's eyes, offered some advice. She mentioned a local trainer, a man named Jed, who had a reputation for working wonders with young horses. He's tough, but fair, she said, and he knows horses inside and out. Might be worth talking to him, Elias. She's got potential. Elias hadn't even considered professional training. His world had shrunk to the basics of survival. But Martha's words planted a seed. He saw the intelligence in Whisper's eyes, the natural athleticism she possessed. Perhaps she was destined for more than just grazing in his worn-out paddock. The idea was both exciting and daunting. Hiring a trainer, even a fair one, would cost money, something Elias was still desperately short of. But the thought of Whisper reaching her full potential, of seeing her shine, was a powerful motivator. He thanked Martha, his mind already racing with possibilities. He knew he couldn't afford to ignore such an opportunity. He would have to find a way to make it work. The 50-cent foal was beginning to demand more than just basic care. She was demanding a future. The decision to seek out Jed, the trainer, weighed heavily on Elias. It was a significant financial commitment, one he was unsure he could meet. He spent days contemplating it, his usual solitude now filled with a new kind of anxiety, one mixed with eager anticipation. He decided to approach Jed with honesty. He rode Whisper, who was now strong enough for longer rides, to Jed's ranch, a place known for its immaculately kept facilities and the quiet efficiency of its operations. Jed himself was a man of few words, his face weathered and etched with the stories of a lifetime spent with horses. He observed Whisper closely as Elias explained his situation, his voice earnest and unpretentious. He told Jed about buying her for 50 cents, about her initial fragility and the surprising resilience she had shown. Jed's expression remained impassive, but Elias could see a flicker of interest in the trainer's sharp eyes. He asked Elias to let Whisper run. As Whisper galloped across Jed's practice arena, her movements fluid and powerful, Jed watched with a keen, discerning gaze. He saw the raw talent, the inherent grace, the untapped potential. He also saw the deep bond between the horse and her owner. When Whisper returned, panting but eager, Jed finally spoke. "She's got heart," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "And she's smart, but she needs discipline, needs polish." He looked directly at Elias. "Training isn't cheap, Elias. You sure you're ready for this?" Elias met his gaze, his own determination firm. "I am. She's worth it." Jed nodded slowly. "All right, we'll start slow, but you'll need to be here. You need to learn alongside her." This was more than Elias had bargained for. He'd assumed he'd just drop her off and pick her up. But Jed's approach was one of partnership, of shared learning. It meant more time away from his ranch, more effort, more financial strain. Yet, a thrill went through him. He would be a part of Whisper's journey, learning and growing with her. The training sessions were demanding for both Elias and Whisper. Jed's methods were rigorous, pushing them both to their limits. Whisper, with her innate intelligence and desire to please, learned quickly. She responded to Jed's commands with increasing confidence and precision. Elias, under Jed's patient tutelage, learned the finer points of horsemanship, of understanding a horse's subtle cues, of building a partnership based on trust and respect. He discovered he had a natural's aptitude for it, a connection to horses he hadn't realized existed. He found a deep satisfaction in the rhythm of the training, in the shared effort. He and Whisper became a team, their bond deepening with each passing day. He learned to read Whisper's moods, her hesitations, her bursts of enthusiasm. He began to see the world through her eyes, to understand her instincts. The 50-cent foal was transforming, not just physically, but in spirit, and so was Elias. The ranch, though still in need of work, began to feel less like a burden and more like a sanctuary where he and Whisper could practice and grow. He started making small improvements, inspired by what he saw at Jed's. He repaired the barn roof, mended the corrals, and even started clearing new land for pasture. The work felt less like a chore and more like an investment in their future. As Whisper's training progressed, Jed began to notice her exceptional aptitude for a particular discipline: jumping. She had a natural athleticism, a bold spirit, and a remarkable ability to gauge distances and heights. Jed saw potential for her to compete. Elias, who had never considered anything beyond basic ranch work, was initially taken aback. Competition seemed like a world away from his humble existence, but Jed was insistent. "This horse," he told Elias one afternoon, his voice filled with conviction, "has what it takes. She's got the talent, the heart. She could be something special." The idea of Whisper competing was both thrilling and terrifying for Elias. He pictured her in an arena, surrounded by crowds, a far cry from the quiet paddock where he'd first found her. But he trusted Jed, and more importantly, he trusted Whisper. He saw the spark in her eyes when she successfully cleared a challenging jump, the pride she seemed to exude. He realized that holding her back, keeping her confined to his small ranch, would be a disservice to her extraordinary abilities. He knew he had to give her the chance to shine. This decision marked a turning point. Elias wasn't just a poor rancher anymore. He was the owner of a horse with immense potential, and he was committed to helping her reach it. The journey from a 50-cent gamble to a potential champion was unfolding before his eyes, and he was ready for whatever came next. He began to envision a future for them, a future filled with challenges, but also with the promise of shared success. The ranch, once a symbol of his limitations, was becoming a launching pad for their dreams. The first competition was a local event, a modest affair held at a county fair, not unlike the one where Elias had found Whisper. Elias was a bundle of nerves, his hands clammy as he led Whisper into the warm-up ring. Whisper, however, seemed unfazed. She moved with a calm confidence, her ears perked, her attention alert. Jed was there, offering quiet words of encouragement, his presence a steadying force. When it was their turn, Elias took a deep breath and guided Whisper towards the starting line. The course was a series of jumps, some small, some moderately challenging. Elias felt a surge of adrenaline as the bell rang. He and Whisper moved as one, a seamless partnership forged through countless hours of training. Whisper leapt effortlessly over each obstacle, her form elegant and powerful. Elias guided her with gentle cues, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw the admiration in the eyes of the spectators, heard their murmurs of appreciation. It was a world away from the quiet solitude of his ranch, but it felt right. They completed the course without a single fault, a clear round. The announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeaker. "And that's a clear round for Elias and Whisper. A fantastic performance." A wave of relief and exhilaration washed over Elias. He'd done it. They'd done it. Whisper, the 50-cent foal, had just won her first competition. As he accepted the blue ribbon, Elias felt a tear escape his eye. It wasn't just about winning. It was about the journey, about the transformation of both horse and owner. From that day on, their success grew. They moved on to larger, more prestigious events, each victory a testament to Whisper's talent and Elias's dedication. Elias, once a man defined by his poverty, was now recognized as a skilled horseman, his quiet dedication speaking volumes. He never forgot where he came from, though. He continued to live modestly, his ranch still the humble home he shared with Whisper. But now, The ranch was not a symbol of his struggles, but of his resilience. He invested some of their winnings back into the land, improving pastures, upgrading the barn, and creating a state-of-the-art training facility. He also used his newfound financial stability to help others in his community. He sponsored local youth writing programs, donated feed to struggling farmers, and offered his expertise to anyone who needed it. He and Whisper became local heroes, their story a beacon of hope. People would travel miles just to see Whisper, to witness the magic of the 50-cent foal who had soared to greatness. Elias often found himself surrounded by admirers, answering questions with humility and grace. He would always point to Whisper, acknowledging her as the true star. One day, a famous breeder, a man who had discovered many champion horses, approached Elias. He offered Elias a staggering sum for Whisper, enough money to set him up for life, to buy the biggest ranch, to never worry about money again. Elias listened patiently, his hand resting on Whisper's strong neck. He looked at the breeder, then at Whisper, her intelligent eyes watching him. He thought about the dusty auction, the 50 cents, the weak foal who had looked up at him with such hope. He thought about the long nights, the hard work, the shared triumphs. He thought about the connection he had with this incredible animal, a bond that transcended money. "Thank you for your offer," Elias said, his voice calm and firm. "But she's not for sale. She's family." The breeder, surprised but respectful, nodded. He understood. He saw the unspoken truth. Whisper was more than just a horse. She was Elias's salvation, his partner, his legacy. Elias and Whisper continued their journey together. They competed, they won, and they inspired. Elias never forgot the man who had sold him Whisper for $50. He often wondered what had become of him, but he held no resentment. He knew that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected and seemingly insignificant packages. Whisper eventually retired from competitive jumping, but her influence continued. She became a beloved broodmare, producing offspring that inherited her talent, her spirit, and her gentle nature. Elias, now a respected figure in the equestrian world, dedicated himself to breeding and training young horses, passing on the lessons he'd learned from Whisper and Jed. He never forgot the humble beginnings, the dusty auction pen, the 50 cents. It was a constant reminder that greatness can be found in the most unlikely places, and that compassion and dedication can transform the most fragile beginnings into extraordinary futures. His ranch, once a symbol of his hardship, was now a thriving center of excellence, a testament to the enduring power of a 50-cent gamble and the unbreakable bond between a man and his horse. He often sat in the paddock, watching Whisper graze peacefully, her coat still gleaming, her spirit undimmed. He would reach out and stroke her velvety muzzle, and she would lean into his touch, a quiet understanding passing between them. The wind still blew across the plains, but now it carried not just the whisper of hardship, but the echo of triumph, the story of a poor rancher and the tiny foal who changed his life forever. His story became a legend, whispered around campfires and across fertile fields, a powerful reminder that every life, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, has the potential for incredible greatness. He had bought a foal for 50 cents, and in return, he had gained a fortune of love, purpose, and a legacy that would last a lifetime. The world saw a champion horse. Elias saw the 50-cent miracle that had taught him the true meaning of hope, resilience, and the profound connection that can exist between two souls against all odds. His life, once defined by scarcity, was now overflowing with abundance, not of material wealth, but of the kind that truly mattered. Elias dedicated himself to Whisper's care. He learned her habits, her little quirks. He noticed she was a natural athlete, even in her weakened state. He found himself smiling more. Whisper became Elias's champion, a testament to his care. Their story shows how compassion can transform lives, proving that even the smallest beginnings can lead to extraordinary futures.